The Bear Roar Special Edition series, Bandwidth, serves as a platform to celebrate the people and stories of Dan's book, Bandwidth, the untold story of ambition, deception, and innovation that shaped the internet age and the dot-com boom. The story covers the epic journey of the creation of the internet backbones, the building of the early competitive fiber networks in the 1990s, the bandwidth boom, bust, and resurrection, ending in 2020 when Dan's company, Zayo, was sold. The book is available for pre-order on Amazon and Barnes & Noble with a February 2025 release date. Head to dan-caruso.com/book for more details. In this episode of The Bear Roars, Dan sits down with Stephanie Copeland, who currently serves as the managing partner at 4 Points Funding. Stephanie and Dan's paths first crossed in the 90s at Metropolitan Fiber Systems, followed by brief stints at WorldCom when MFS was acquired, reuniting at Level 3, and again at Zayo in 2012, where she served as SVP of the European Business Unit and eventually ran the Ethernet Business Unit. Stephanie and Dan recount the vastly different company cultures in the industry, their personal experiences with WorldCom and Quest's fraudulent activities, and the triumphs and struggles they encountered along the way. Let's poke the bear to kick off the conversation.
Stephanie.
Dan.
It's been a lot of years.
I can't believe we're only 25.
I know.
How is this happening?
So if you're that young, it's going to sound like you are a job hopper extraordinaire. So take us through kind of all of the crazy bandwidth companies that you had a role in over this journey.
It's so funny. I don't know if when you were a child where you either thought, what I want to do is I want to be in telecom. That was not.
It's so exciting.
It's so exciting. And I want to, frankly speaking, I want to, see what's going to come next. It's so exciting. But I went to this unbelievably prestigious university in Champaign, in Urbana-Champaign in Illinois. You might be familiar with it, Dan. University of Illinois. It's now called.
Wait, you went here? I thought you were just a bartender at Cam's.
I was also a bartender at Cam's.
You were a student too? I didn't realize that.
Sometimes. If you serve enough drinks, you can get a degree.
Well, tell them what Cam's is first of all, and what it took to be a bartender at Cam's, because that was the hardest job to get in Southwest Chicago. So
Cam's was the home of the drinking Illini. And we were this bar that was this kind of infamous Greek bar that it's famous for its Sunday night quarter beers. So people would take $5 and get pretty excited with quarter beers. And the biggest deal was that if you worked there, you got to go in the front of the line, and the line was around the block. So as soon as I said I was going to Cam's, I had 15 of my sorority sisters lined up next to me saying, can we go with you? So that was kind of fun. And I have no idea how I got a job there. I think I just right time, right place. But in any case,
you must have been a cool kid if you got a job there.
Cool. I was in the German debate club. I was not a cool kid.
All the cool kids were in German debate.
Not a cool kid. But I got a degree at the University of Illinois, again, the new public Ivy, in German, which my dad quickly said, that's a ridiculous degree, and what are you going to do? And so I started looking around at industry, and I wanted to do something international, and I'm like, let me just get into an industry, and then I'll figure out how I get outside of the U.S. So I joined a company in the early 90s called Cable and Wireless, which was a big British conglomerate. And if you think about the UK and in England, there's a lot of colonization that occurred. And it was the phone company or the alternative phone company through deregulation in many of the countries around the world. And I went to work for Cable.
Do you remember roughly how many countries? Because it was all over the place.
I want to say it was 25 or 30, if not more. But I don't really remember. But Australia, Japan, it was the PTT, the phone company in Hong Kong, and all of the Caribbean, really all over the world. And they literally followed the colonization. And I went to work for them in the U.S. for a year. And after the first year, they had an advertisement internally they needed somebody to go to Russia and to be a sales manager in Russia. And it was this unicorn thing where they wanted someone that spoke German, that had some background in telecom, and that was stupid enough to go to Russia in 1993. And I raised my hand.
And what was Russia in 1993? So that was certainly post-Reagan.
It was
post-Soviet Union.
Post-Soviet Union. The wall had just come down in 89. It was still Yeltsin, and Putin was a deputy mayor at the time. And lots of
How would you like Putin as your deputy mayor, man? I wouldn't want to be mayor.
I don't want. Well, you know what? At the time, he was so interesting. he was actually providing a lot of structure and fear in the system, which they needed because, there was no confidence in the system and the ruble was devaluing so quickly that they needed more kind of fear of paying taxes in the system. And he really supported, I shouldn't say this because I'm obviously not a close confidant of Vladimir Putin, but apparently he was very supportive of the mafia because they were doing the job that the police were not doing. So they were kind of this shadow enforcement system that really started getting some structure in line. And now it's become much more dangerous than that now. But at the time it was seen as, hey, we need something, and the police were so underfunded that they couldn't do anything. So I went to work in Russia for a couple of years and had a blast and just really got to see the inside out of the telecom system. Like, Jan, you remember when you were at Bell Atlantic? Do you remember that when they put digital switches in, those things that were not like mechanical? In Russia, they were still using all mechanical switches. So you got to go in and see like switching equipment and stuff from the 1940s. So anyway, got to see a lot of kind of raw infrastructure.
So what digital switch versus what kind of switch?
A
again?
Mechanical.
So what does a mechanical switch look like?
You've seen like old movies where you have operators
I've seen them.
These switches are like these. You can literally hear them clicking, where they're electrical signals that just move the gears more or less to connect different.
So when you
parts
think
of the system.
about it, so people back then, talking on a phone was still relatively new, certainly in other parts of the world. And when you're talking on a phone, you literally had a physical connection, end to end at first. That at that point it had changed in some parts of the world, but it sounds like not quite yet in Russia. So through a mechanical device, there had to have been like a connection that would connect, if I was talking to Stephanie, kind of the wire that my call was coming into to the wire that her call was going out, and mechanically they had to connect. That's crazy. Well,
what's really crazy is often there was also human intervention in between too, not just electrical and mechanical intervention. So we still had operators in our switches in the early 90s in Russia connecting people to the long distance network. So anyway, what happened was it kind of peeled back the layers and gave me a lot of history to then kind of look forward. I came back to the US in 1994 and joined a small company by the name of Metropolitan Fiber Systems.
Yes.
And what was so cool was they were launching an international
is there a
division.
hat behind me that says MFS?
And a logo that's so beautiful.
Yes.
Best company in the world. It was a fun,
it was crazy
fun time.
So that was 94.
Yep, 94.
So I would have been there about 3 years by then, 2.5 years.
Yeah, I think you had, I remember when I first met you, you'd been there since the early 90s.
Yes.
And I went to work for a guy by the name of Colin Williams, who you probably remember, who headed up
for certain.
MFS International. And he, doing exactly what MFS had been doing in the US, which was taking advantage of deregulation and becoming an alternative provider. They were doing the same thing in Europe and Asia and across the Atlantic and Pacific. So I got to work with the sales teams to market and to sell the capacity we were building, and to kind of liaise between each of the sales teams so that if someone was selling to a customer in New York, they also were aware of, and we could sell things around the world. So that was a blast.
And I know you were telling me, and I didn't have a way of really weaving it into the book Bandwidth, but that prior to MFS, undersea cables were always done by the big telephone companies, usually in a consortium.
Yeah.
But MFS was a pioneer in laying fiber cable across the oncene.
So what they were called were cable consortia, and it was typically, they called it the transatlantic telecom system. It was something called TAT 8, TAT 9, TAT 10, TAT 11, 12, et cetera. And you had to have a license 214 in order to land a cable and use it in the US. And you only worked with like these closed parties to do that. And
almost all of them were big telephone companies.
AT&T, and at the time MCI and Sprint, BT, Nippon, like all of the large incumbent telcos. And MFS had both the tenacity and the ingenuity to see, we're going to actually start to break this up and bring real innovation transatlantically.
Who within MFS kind of drove that? Who was the bigger pioneers around getting that?
It was definitely Jane Stoll.
Remember Jane?
Colin Williams, Jamie Delormier.
Remember Jamie?
I am blanking on his name. He's such a great engineer. And he was probably the most driver, and I cannot remember his name, but I will think of that and come back to it. But they worked with regulators to get the right licenses, worked to break into these consortia to say, no, we can play too. And frankly, they innovated technologically as well, because we brought bigger bandwidth than had normally been sold on the TAT systems. Like you would buy 1.5 megabits, the equivalent of nothing, a T1 or even a 64 kilobit channel.
And that compares to what people have in your home today.
You have a gigabit
well, you might have a gigabit of bandwidth just feeding your home today.
And corporations would live on 1.5 megabits across the Atlantic, and they were expensive. I remember we sold the first 45 meg channel, which is called a DS3, across the channel. It was $450,000 a month.
Yeah, and again, that's less than what most people have feeding their house today.
By an order of magnitude, and it was again $450,000 a month. What a bargain! Infonet was the first one that bought that. But again, you were chasing. There was all kinds of unnecessary profit in the system that was just kind of shrouded by regulation and boys' club, or girls' club.
Back then, it was boys' club.
It was mostly boys' club.
What's interesting when you said who were the innovators behind that?
2 women.
There are 2 women.
Yeah.
And
Jane and Jamie are both rock star women, in my opinion. And I will also remember the engineer that I cannot remember, who was fantastic. But the fact is, we innovated that, and then a lot of privatization came around the transatlantic, transpacific, north-south cable systems that we really just take for granted today. It's just like it's there, but it's very expensive to do that.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how expensive that was, think of how rare it was to have phone conversations with people who lived in other parts of the world. If you want to do that, someone would have better been paying a whole lot of money, because the capacity to do that was so expensive. So the world was somewhat, even by the 1990s, was still somewhat shut off from each other. And there wasn't anything called the internet back then. There kind of was, but not in the context of when we first started, at least designing those systems. At least it wasn't on the awareness of those who were deciding whether or not to fund it, deciding whether or not to build it, pricing it, the concept of, boy, there's this thing that's already building momentum called the internet that's going to need shitloads of bandwidth.
Right.
That wasn't kind of in the conversation at that moment in time.
At all. In fact, it was how to work around what you have now versus how to fund this thing that would eventually become a big utility, a big utility for all of us in the literal sense. Do you remember people, again, you said the thing, people didn't make phone calls that much across the Atlantic. Well, there was this industry that was created because of this arbitrage. So in the 90s and in the 80s, if you called from the US to Europe, it cost one amount. If you called from Europe or Asia to the US, it cost a very different amount. It was a lot more expensive because competition was lower there. So they had these companies called callback companies where they would put these rerouting switches in each Europe and Asia, and they would originate the call in Europe, bring it to the US, and then re-originate it back so that the connection was made backwards at just a lower price. And they were just arbitraging
entrepreneurs that work,
making them everywhere. Miami was a big hub for that for some reason. So there's always room to do it differently if you see something that's irrationally priced, and that's what people were doing.
So you're at MFS. How much of your time at MFS was part of MFS Europe or MFS International?
100%. So I was there 100% MFS International, MFS Europe, Asia. We launched Hong Kong, Singapore, Tokyo. We built these pretty large networks in Europe too. And I think that's a little bit lost in the whole conversation about the legacy that MFS built, which was the pan-European network, the pan-German network, the metro networks in London, Paris, France, Amsterdam, Frankfurt, and eventually in many other markets in Europe. And they still exist.
And what's so crazy is, in this company, which, as I'm sure most listeners know, that's the company I joined when I moved from the Bell system that was breaking up. And it was called Chicago Fiber Optics in the late 1980s. Like this little tiny itsy bitsy company putting fiber network underneath the financial district in Chicago and just trying to connect up financial traders to their long distance companies. So this little tiny company in the late 80s, then Kiewit, a construction company who was building the network for them, steps in to fund it because they were about ready to go bankrupt, funds it, takes over control of it. And from around 1989, 1990 through to 1994 that you're describing, it went from just that to all over the US, all throughout Europe, all throughout Asia, innovating on undersea cables. I mean, crazy.
It was crazy. And I don't know if you've ever done this, but I'll walk down the streets in London or in Paris and you'll still see MFS in the manholes. You'll still see the logo where some of the manholes were set, which is so cool.
And that's why I bring my orange paint and put a Z on there.
Z on Zayo. I agree. I think that's probably pretty appropriate.
Yeah.
But it is, every time I see that, you just smile because, again, what we take for granted so much took a lot of blood, sweat, and tears, but also was from a real, what I consider an underweight, not an intellect or innovation, but just an underweight in expectations. This company did so many cool things that still serve today, 30, 40 years later.
And what helped is how naive
we were so dumb.
Everyone was doing this shit, like we didn't know what we didn't know. We didn't care. We thought all the people on the other side were bellheads and dumb and didn't even know what they were doing. And we just did stuff. And it at least thanks to Bernie Ebbers, it worked. So So did you get involved in UUNet at all when you were still part of MFS?
So first of all, we were selling a ton of stuff to UUNet. As I remember the May East and May West, and we were doing all the peering points with UUNet and AOL. And MFS International actually sat in the same building as UUNet in the suburbs of DC, and got a little bit involved with Sidgmore on doing some of his network build out. And then this is kind of a funny. So we acquired UUNet about almost a year prior to the announcement of being acquired by WorldCom. And UUNet was one of the fastest growing, most sustainable kind of serious player in internet transit and internet transport. And I remember going to Jackson, again, very junior, going there to talk to their product teams after WorldCom had acquired us. And one of the first things that they were talking about was the sale of UUNet. They're selling it off. And someone told me the story. This is anecdote. It's probably not 100% true, but let's not let facts get in the way of a good story. So
hard to fact check from back then.
Yeah, we probably can't fact check this, but apparently one of Bernie's lieutenants came to him and said, all those faxes you're sending, Bernie? He's like, those are going to UUNet. We don't want to sell this company. They had to talk him into understanding that this was the future. And this was in 97. So it wasn't like it was even in the 80s or even early 90s. But
the story that, variations of that story have been told many times, not the facts itself, but the story of the first thing Bernie wanted to do when he took control of MFS was to sell UUNet. Thought it was the dumbest thing he ever heard of. He didn't know what they did. It was $2 billion. Man, if I get $2 billion for this, I'll take it all day long. And then he read some analyst reports, and the analyst reports said one of the smartest things Bernie did when he acquired MFS is he got with it this biggest internet backbone in the world, and he's going to be able to do so much with it. So he kind of read the report and said, maybe we'll keep this.
I like my story better.
I like
the facts, but
I'm sure there's lots of variations.
It's probably yours is probably more close to the truth.
It's probably there's probably a lot of data points where the light bulb had to go off in his
mind. He also wanted to sell off the international assets, which ended up being, obviously also a big driver of profit for the company. And again, I think once he finally got religion, he started his whole end-to-end service campaign, which was he was a phone company again that could provide service from the very local to around the world, which hadn't really ever occurred and had occurred in some form before AT&T was broken up, where they were the end-to-end provider. And so our first sales kickoff after WorldCom closed and before Level 3 had officially launched, I went to their sales kickoff in Nashville, I think, at the Gaylord. I mean, and it was everything that you would imagine of a Southern company's sales kickoff. And the entire, this is kind of funny. And I will stop it where I think it may be inappropriate, but you had all these women on stage singing end-to-end service about this. And I was about to die. I mean, I'm a glorious sign. I'm feminist. And I was looking at the stage like, oh my God, I cannot be in this company.
And the women on stage were employees or
they
something?
Were not employees. Well, they were employed for that day.
They were employed.
They were employed. Sure. And they were wearing super interesting outfits. And it made me really proud to be part of the company. So very shortly thereafter, it was actually you gave me a call, and I'm trying to remember, Dan, whether it was you directly or somebody else. And then we talked about joining Level 3. It was in late 1997.
And actually, before we go there, let's stay on WorldCom for a little bit more.
Sure.
One thing when we talk about WorldCom, and WorldCom's in the book, of course. There's one other aspect of WorldCom that you hit on that we don't talk about enough. I mean, it was a sales-driven culture.
100%.
I mean, it was hardcore salespeople with very straightforward sales plans that could be very lucrative. When it came to the day-to-day running organization, it was sales-driven. I mean, that's where all the power was.
100%.
They dictated what everyone else did. Everyone was there to serve sales, other than the corporate who was trying to figure out how to play around with the books. But it was pretty new to me to see that significant of a shift culture-wise from what MFS was. MFS had a strong sales culture too, but this was so tilted towards sales.
Well, I think it was interesting to me was that it wasn't about even selling what we had. It was just selling. It wasn't even, so there wasn't any kind of core integrity around the fact that we wanted to innovate. We wanted to be a respectable and a cherished product. I don't mean that in a lighthearted way. I mean that like we want to be critical infrastructure. And that, like you said, it was just shocking. And it is as unruly as you can imagine it to be. And it never ends up, it never ends well when it's just driven that way.
Yeah.
So
there's no linkage between what was sold and what price was sold at. As long as it turned into revenue, that's all, not just the sales side I was cared about, but the reporting structure above that. Everyone else was there to just do whatever sales wants you to do. Revenue's everything. And how much it costs, where it costs money, if it costs money, if it was profitable or not. I mean, there's no even attempt to have a conversation.
And, like I said, I'm just a, girl from rural Illinois that has a German degree. So what do I know about cash flow and balance sheets?
A lot now.
But a lot now. But I think even if you record revenue, eventually you have to collect cash as well. And that wasn't even important.
No.
So it was, the amount of deals that I saw that was being done that were not even credit worthy. And the investment we were making in uncreditworthy customers was, just part of the start of the bubble going into the end of the century, frankly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And what was your last job at WorldCom? What were you doing?
I was still the part of international, running the sales teams between the countries, but frankly, I was only there for 4 months after the closure, so it wasn't who knows what it would have become. But I don't think I could have stayed in a place that had, to your point, no connectivity between what we sold and what we delivered and the actual integrity of the business.
Yeah, the soul. It didn't feel like there was any soul of the business.
That's right. Yeah.
No, it was like what it was, but it didn't feel like you were working for any purpose other than,
Then to ring a bell.
Yeah,
absolutely.
So MFS.
So
level
3. So in late 97, I remember calling my then husband at the time and saying, "Hey, you want to move to Denver?" And he was like, "Where?" We were living in DC. Where?
Denver's come a long ways.
Oh my gosh. I have to tell you, the best thing that you guys ever decided was to put the headquarters of Level 3 in Colorado, in Boulder, and in the Metro Front Range of Colorado. But there were probably 20 people on the team at that point, and I came on as a product management lead, running some of our first products. We did Private Line and our colo products. And we had at that time, it's kind of funny, T-Colo, which was a colocation for kind of networking and equipment. And think of it as like DC power, or a kind of power that you use for networking equipment. And then there was, they called it, what do we call it? iColo or Web Colo or something?
Yeah,
and
might be Web.
Web Colo. And that was more raised floor and hosting servers and things like that.
I hear that's a pretty big deal.
It's a pretty big deal. I think it's coming along. I'm not sure whether it'll ever get,
You're on the board advantage, right? So we definitely got to get
I got to be careful about this. Yeah. But so T-Colo, Private Line, and at the point we were under construction of the network. So we built what was about 18,000 miles of intercity network, a ton of metro fiber networks across the U.S. A lot of strong. We had one of the first teams that had the idea that it's going to matter how much and how deep of bandwidth you have and the cost curve you can chase. But at the time, we needed to start generating revenue before that. So we established a bunch of operating leases and a bunch of things so we could start reselling to customers prior to moving them on our network. And so I ran the product management teams for that, which was my first step into what I'll call business management versus just the market, kind of go to market side.
Yeah, no, I remember because you'll remember this too, very early on in level 3, before we even know where we were going to spend money, there was kind of this rush to kind of collect talent. And some of the talent on network side had work to do. You know, we had to figure out what we're going to build and we had to go build it. But some of the talent was on the sales side of the house. And so they started hiring very expensive people, and not just one or two of them, lots of them. And there's nothing to sell. And there's nothing to sell next quarter or even next year. It's like, okay, so they start getting really antsy. And they're like, you know, we can't wait 3 years while you guys build this network. We need to sell something right now, which got us going on like, okay, maybe there's like a smart business play in leasing bandwidth from others who are going to be competitors, but we're going to give them a bunch of money because they're ahead of us in building out network. We're going to get a bunch of capacity in exchange, and then we're going to put our sales force to work. And the whole idea was we would, you know, build up a customer base, we build up revenue, and then we'd switch the service onto our own network. And I don't know if that, hindsight, was that a good idea, not good idea? Who knows?
I don't know. I think it was actually, there's 3 things that were really good about it. One was you could forward price, and we were doing 3 and 5 year contracts. So you could, to the extent that once these networks put in place, it was really difficult to switch. So we figured, you've got some longevity on these private networks. So you could forward price a little bit into it and give yourself a little advantage, which was good. But secondly, you just built relationships with the customer base on a new network and a new platform. And they were excited about being part of that too, which I think you can never do that too early. And then the third thing is we got some operating chops underneath us. So, there's one thing to build a network and put it into place, but to operate it and to run a NOC, to run a network control center, and to run a customer service center, that kind of just motion, I think, was good to have ahead of the network. Yeah. So I think there were some really good things. Did we make the most profitable deals? Probably not, but I think it was the right kind of investment.
I always wondered when Cincinnati Bell bought Broadwing, did they know that so much of Broadwing's revenue was from us, and we were just about ready to finish building the network and move that all over? When they diligenced that, did they see that, or did they just miss that? Because that was obviously a disaster for them.
It has to. I mean, if they didn't see it, it was just a blatant oversight because our contract terms were pretty clear. And the thing that I thought was so interesting about level 3, again, in contrast, and I don't mean to villainize any company, but in contrast to WorldCom, was that level 3 operated pristinely. I mean, we weren't trying to be angels, but we were trying to operate within the rules of the book. We weren't trying to scam. We weren't trying to take advantage of different accounting practices. We weren't trying to take advantage of other customers. So our contracts were pretty clear. Our terms were clear. And it was a very straightforward way to operate because we felt like that was the only way to be sustainably relevant.
And we also had this overwhelming sense of purpose, like a destiny.
Yes,
like we were building something for the ages, and all this other activity that was going on. From our point of view, this is really not saying this is true. It's saying just how the culture and the mindset was. It was like, we're doing this, the right way. We don't mind spending extra money because we're going to build all these extra conduits, and we're going to put in the absolute best fiber, and we're going to have the absolute best internet backbone, and we're in this for the very long haul. Where do you think? Where do you think that came from? That because that was, I'm sure other companies maybe that were our rivals had some element of that as well, but most I don't think really did. Well, why do you think that was so strongly part of our culture?
I think when again, I don't know that I have a firm answer for this, but the thing that I felt like when I left MFS and I joined level 3, which was kind of the same management team, it was almost a continuation of a story that hadn't been finished yet with MFS.
Yes.
And so I do not think that I think it was born in a disruptive culture, in hey, we're going to do this the right way and the long term, and we're going to be beneficial to the environment, and we're going to make some money along the way, but we're not going to cheat. We're not going to cheat in any way, cheat investors, cheat customers, cheat ourselves. And I think that we started that way at level 3 because we were just this continuation of a story cut too short. I would say that level 3 over time, of course, and this, we'll continue the conversation around this, got caught up in obviously short-term pressures of delivering against the thesis that maybe the timing wasn't exactly, where we planned it to be, but the time it came along, it just didn't come along in the right time frame. And when you're a public company, as you know, and you said this to me a number of times before Zayo went public, be careful what you ask for, because the pressures that come with quarterly reporting and kind of sentiment expectations can really have an adverse impact on culture and on losing your purpose, which I think occurred with level 3 along the way.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, and occurred at Zayo too.
Absolutely,
it was, and I think again, when I look back, you kind of focus on things you wish you'd have done differently as opposed to the things you did well. And one of the things I keep asking myself is, I was preparing for that, preparing to be a public company with eyes wide open that I didn't want us to lose that. Yet in the overall swarm of everything, you did lose it. You just couldn't stay ahead of that.
And it's, again, you don't fault anyone for doing that, but it's also, I don't know that I know a way around that, but I wish I could I wish there was a way to do that. And I wish people that were innovating today could find a way to work in the public markets in a way that doesn't reward such short-term thinking, because we've got a bunch of challenges ahead of us now that are going to take really long-term thinking. And I worry that our system is going to disrupt that.
Yeah, no doubt. Okay. So, level 3.
Yeah.
What are some of the big things you remember from level 3?
Oh gosh.
Big, juicy, fun things.
Let's see.
Fun that makes you cringe.
It makes you cringe. So I quickly moved from Denver. I was here for about 6 months, and then I went to Europe and worked for a woman by the name of Gail Smith, who headed up Europe for level 3. And there's probably too many cringy things. Some involve just the sales culture generally in London, and it wasn't necessarily a level 3 thing. That were a lot of potentially habits that you would do in the office in London that you wouldn't do in the office in Chicago or in Denver.
Like
partaking in maybe some alcohol from time to time. Perhaps I'm trying to think of what I can say without completely implicating an entire team.
Well, it was.
Let me say.
I don't think it's a team. I think it's the times that
the times
in
were rah-rah. The times were we went public. We were at $120, $130 a share. I do remember sitting down with Crow and with the team that came over to Europe one time, and we were obviously our moniker was 260 by 06, which was we were going to be a $260 billion market cap company by 2006, and I remember thinking in like the middle of 2000, like, why is our stock price only at 72?
Only at 72.
Why are we going exactly? I remember. Do you remember? Andrew Morley? Well, I remember asking him, Andrew, what's going on? And he was like, I don't know. I'm sure hindsight was very clear, but at the time it felt elusive. And so fun things at level 3. I mean, frankly, just the momentum and the sheer ability to go in and be different in the market and really delight customers was a blast, kind of first and foremost. Secondly, we also just felt like we were going to, again, it's that sense of the purpose, do it better and stronger. So we didn't come in and try to be even some of the other infrastructure providers that were doing it in a shortcut way, like Colt, I don't know if you're City of London Telecommunications and other companies, but we were doing it in the right way. And I was so proud to be, part of that. I also, this is not relevant to bandwidth at all, but I produced my first offspring during that time. In 2000, I had my daughter, Fiona, in London, and just experiencing that was a real thrill for me. But the other thing I would say, which is interesting, again, and I'm going to bring up a little bit of the female thing. I hope that's okay.
Oh, absolutely. No, the bandwidth book, one thing is when people go through it, they're like, how come every single person in here is a white male? Like, kind of.
It was rare.
It was that way.
It was that way. And particularly
not right, but it was.
Particularly the people that are taking risk, right? The people that are really taking risk, not just following. And I consider myself an absolute follower. But what I would say is that through the 90s, I started my career in 89, and through the 90s, and even to today, but much less than used to be, I didn't ever feel like I was treated differently until I had my daughter, until I had Fiona. And I remember I was running product management and I had a team in the US and a team in Asia, and they were all kind of waiting for me to go on maternity leave. And then they're like, oh, she's not going to come back. And my whole life was my career. I couldn't imagine not coming back and not being part of it. And in fact, I only took about 3 weeks of maternity leave. But it was it was almost like this shift of, oh, I am seen a little differently than other people. I am not taken as seriously, or maybe that's the wrong way to say it. I'm not seen as committed as maybe a male would be, because I'll have other pressures. And and that was the first time that I realized that, and it hit home hard. And then I just ignored it again. I just said, no, I'm not going to.
Larissa Herta told me a story just recently, last couple of weeks. So Larissa Herta is CEO of TW Telecom, but with us at MFS in the early years. She told the story about she joined MFS, was responsible for a lot of big accounts, and she closed a big sale while she was in the hospital getting ready to deliver a baby. And Royce Holland, the COO, who we all loved, Royce would tell the story when they went on the IPO roadshow to illustrate how dedicated the employees were. When Liz told me the story, she said, well, yes, but there was a little bit more to the story. As one of the senior-most women in MFS, one of the other senior women, she shared the name, who I knew and was really talented. She went and had a baby, and when she went to come back, they said, I'm sorry, your job's eliminated. So Larissa's like, I need this job. So I had to keep working even in the delivery room. Because I was legitimately concerned that, once I was ready to come back, I would get the same message. So that was legal back then, and it was not uncommon back then.
And it was, frankly, people were like, that's your choice, and that's where you are. Yeah. It's hard to, I won't go down this path too far, but it is hard to explain it to people when it becomes, that seems pretty obvious. And now the differences are more nuanced and they're even harder to get at. But I do remember that being like a kind of a awakening for me, like, oh, I'm not one of the guys. I'm not this.
You didn't get that when you were on stage at WorldCom
well,
Sales
I was only
Conference
watching.
Or watching the
there
stage
were others.
show.
They were, I should have. Duh. But it's funny when I fast forward about 7 years, I had my second child and I didn't take a day of maternity leave because I just too worried about both my reputation and the perception of being checked in or checked out. And it's a hard balance I don't want to force anyone, male or female, to do something they don't want to do if they want to take care of their children or dedicate their entire life to their career. But the fact is, to be kind of pre-categorized and one or the other is the thing that's probably most painful. But it's changing pretty dramatically. And I can't even imagine. I see some of the women that I see today and that I talk to, and I'm so thrilled with how much hubris in a good way and how much risk they're willing to tolerate that I wasn't. I think they were just raised differently. So it's cool. Yeah. And so level 3, London for me was just a blast, and like working in that atmosphere. And again, it was just like a continuation of MFS. So it was like being home.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So did you end up coming back to the US while still at
I
level
did.
3?
I did. Do you want me to tell you
Yes.
I came back to level 3 and to the USA in April of 2001. And the world was kind of falling apart at that time.
Yes.
And, our stock price was in the tank. We had hired a bunch of new leadership that I didn't know very well. And you and I were having conversations about coming in and working for you in a role. And at the same time, Quest Communications was asking me to come do some work for them. And they seemed to be high flying and doing pretty well. And I remember having a conversation with you. We were in the interest of level 3's campus. There's this big circular interest, and you and I are standing there. And I said, Dan, I've come back to this place and I don't feel like I've got a lot of trust earned here. There's a lot of management team, and whether people really see me as a vice president. And you kind of scratch your head, you did your head scratch. You said,
thing.
Yeah. You said, well, Stephanie, the jury's still out. And I remember thinking, okay, jury's still out. So I just gotten this offer from Quest, and it was a lot more money, and it was a big corporation. I'd have a huge team, and I was going to be a Section 16 insider, and I could bring all this stuff. And I'm like, I guess well, then I'm going to go try it. If I'm not going to, if our stock was, close to $1 at that point. And so I decided to go work for Quest and spent
Who were the
10
new,
years.
like the new people? Who were the new people back then?
It was Neil Hobbs and
So that was when the Lee Joe and Neil.
Lee
and
Job. And Lee Job
that was 2001. It seems like that would have been later than that.
No, it was 2001. And Lee Job was like the things that you wrote about in the book and the things, he was infamous at that time. It wasn't that long. And it was also, I can't remember whether, is it Andrew Crane?
Andrew.
Whether he came with Neil.
I think he came a little bit later.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't think I overlapped with him, but Neil was there. And I just remember being in a few meetings and thinking, I don't have the deposits in the bank with these guys. And I was feeling like I don't have the same trust built up, and it didn't feel like home anymore, frankly. Or the same sense of purpose that I joined. That said, still an unbelievable company. And when I went to Quest, I stayed in close contact with a lot of people and continue to, who are close friends and who I worked with again eventually. But Quest for me was a chapter of going from infrastructure to services and really seeing what a large scale company, how you operate and become a change agent in that type of company, which was also a great learning environment.
And they were large because of US West.
US West.
They had the whole telephone company aspect to them.
Yeah.
But the part that was more legacy Quest was probably similar.
Very similar and very similar to WorldCom, very cowboyish, very irreverent around profitability, and Quest took a lot of liberties clearly with how they would account for things. And we paid a price. What was so interesting for me in 2001, I was there for just the third quarter of that year, and I ran pricing and offer management. So we did all the special contracts and all the deals. So every deal that was done with Enron or with WorldCom or with Global Crossing, et cetera, we were doing these swaps, which were completely ridiculous to do on a network.
And how did it feel when you were in the middle of that? Like, where was the drive for that coming from? Who was kind of wanting to get those done?
Joe, again, this is so Nacho was the person. I remember being on calls with him, just saying, no, we're doing it this way, we're doing it that way. And some members of my team actually paid fines, and because they were doing some deals that were clearly manipulating how we were reporting.
And you kind of know it. You know something's up. You don't know what. Wrong. And the CEO, who's got this bigger than life reputation, is saying, this is what we have to do.
This is what we're doing. And we're not going down like the rest of them. We're continuing to grow revenues, and we're continuing to grow as a company. And we were doing these contracts that were like almost against my religion. Like you were giving control of a network to a customer in order to record the revenue like they bought a part of the network. And you'd never do that as an operator, particularly an operator of that scale. And so we did that a number of times, and I was only there for one quarter when that went on. But the last day of the quarter was a Sunday, and we were in the office until midnight working on deals because they were trying to sign things by the end of the quarter, which was just in a recurring revenue business. It just doesn't make any sense. It makes zero sense. So if you just
look out a handful more quarters, you have to know, so the only mentality that could really support is where the person who's driving you to do that is thinking they're going to be trading their stock in the really short term. Like, I just need one more quarter to dump a bunch of my stock. And by the time this plays out, maybe I'm, maybe I'll even be able to resign and say I've got family situation or whatever. But it makes no sense in any context other than I'm going to get out of this in the next 6 months, maybe 9 months. I just need to keep like the illusion of value creation so that the stock stays up and I trade like crazy.
And I trade like crazy. And what Nacho was eventually convicted of was insider trading, which has probably missed the mark on actually what he was doing, but he was convicted rightly.
Yeah.
And I spent
and the reason for that, because obviously I did a lot of research for Bandwidth, is they thought that it'd be too hard because of how complicated this whole bandwidth trading. Like, we probably have more risk of getting to conviction, even though that's the big problem. But the insider trading is, was a clearer path to conviction.
And the main witness against him was our CEO, Afshin Mohebi, and I was on his witness list. And so I remember I was almost 8 months pregnant, still testifying. And Henry, my son, was born in 2008, still testifying. And
you were testifying in what context?
In the context of being Afshin's witness on Afshin's list against who was really doing the manipulation. Yeah. And we were just in the heart of it. I didn't realize
you were doing a lot of the testimony.
We did a lot of the SEC and the FBI investigated.
Do you have something to share with me?
I do, in fact.
Let's see.
Here's Mr. Cruz.
This is a toast to, let's see, growing up in Illinois, being part of MFS, being part of Level 3. We'll skip the Quest part. A little bit of being part of WorldCom, but then being part of Zayo. Sure. And just our careers have kind of bounced against each other for a long time. So,
and to a long friendship.
Yes.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
Now this will get really interesting. So, no, but so there were, you can imagine when the house of cards kind of falls, everybody's fighting each other and pointing the fingers at each other. So they, both parties had a long list of witnesses. The SEC and the FBI investigated us. Clearly, we restated $6 billion of revenue.
$6 billion.
And it was a crazed time. We were the phone company, US West, that was acquired in 99 by Quest, 3 years later, close to bankruptcy, which was so incredibly impactful to me, just realizing how quickly things
because these are employees who've been part of US West for 30, 35 years. Yep. Most of their wealth sitting in pension. Yeah. In a lot of it in the form of the company stock. And
that's right.
All of a sudden, they're in retirement age and their life savings are going to nothing.
And I mean, it was truly criminal in the real sense of criminal, because it both ethically was so wrong in its deception, but also it was stealing from people. But I think that I remember 2 guys on my team. We had to get their own lawyers. Our CFO was put on house arrest. It was such a scary time. I had a young 2-year-old at the time. I was going through a divorce. It was such a scary time. But
did you feel like you might?
Absolutely. There was one contract that my boss signed. We were dividing and conquering, and he signed it, and it happened to be with Enron. And Monday, we both came back in the office, and he's like, "Hey, Stephanie, I can't sign this because I have a conflict here. Can you sign this?" So I signed it, and I dated it first day of the next quarter. And he's like, "No, you have to date it when it's date stamped." And it was date stamped the day before. So I crossed out the date and wrote the prior date.
Which shows that you didn't really know
I had no idea,
wrong, or
right.
you would have never done it that
I wouldn't
way.
have done. But that one act was 7 or 8 months of testimony. And I mean, just coming back around and just being in front of that level, it scares. It almost makes you think you did something wrong, even when you know you didn't, because you think, gosh, could I have done something differently? And I was proud to say that I had 4 or 5 people on the team, including myself, that were sending emails saying, why we should not be doing this. Why are we doing this? I'm not going to do that one. And so we had some of that going on, but it wasn't enough when you have a Nacho that's just saying, hey, this is where we're going.
And he was I don't recall ever meeting him, at least not in a small group setting. But my perception is that he had a really strong personality, like even
very
in a world where most people had strong personalities, he was,
very.
He was out there with anyone.
And he had a chip on his shoulder too. I mean, he really wanted to be the guy at AT&T, and he had a chip on his shoulder. And he used to he would take an elevator up to 52 at Quest, and nobody else could ride on the elevator with him. He was that type of elitist.
Really?
Yeah. They'd lock it. So he would go up with his bodyguard, and it was just I only overlapped with him for a couple of years.
That used to be me too, but that's because no one wanted to be on the elevator.
Well, that was more about smell, Dan. Than I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. No, but the funny thing, like on the 2 floors that we had, the thing that was it was such a great learning experience, because it made you like it all of a sudden was like, don't dance that close to the sun. Just stay back and do the right thing. If you ever had any temptation, just don't. So it was really helpful to me. And then we had our next CEO that came in, was just...
Before we go there,
oh yeah,
tell us the CalPoint story.
Oh God, okay.
Because my memory is foggy. It was so prominent in the research. I had forgotten that was the first thing that really kind of popped up. But I do have vague memories of Glenn keep coming to meetings saying, this is going to happen. I was like, what is this? But tell me that was all.
First of all, to talk about the transactions, what we would do is we would sell bandwidth. And when you're selling bandwidth, you're just selling them a kind of a lane on the highway, on the internet highway. But instead of selling them a lane that they could use when they wanted to, we were saying, hey, we're going to build it. It's like a condo. Nobody else, when you're not using it, nobody else can use it. So this is your channel. And by doing that, we would recognize the revenue up front versus amortizing it over the length of the contract, which is now common practice. So that just manipulated revenue.
So they get to use it for 20 years.
20 years, but we would recognize.
But you would be able to show all
$20
the
million
revenue,
of revenue,
right out of the gate.
And so CalPoint was quasi in that vein where they were going to set up a network.
And what was CalPoint? Was it?
It was
a new company.
It was a new company that was being established as a network provider, and we were going.
Was it a legit company? Would
it
they
was
have a legit purpose?
It had a legit purpose. It didn't have a legit chance because it was way too late, and it was not capitalized the right way. There was all kinds of things that was wrong with it, but it wasn't trying. It wasn't a shell. We were going to sell CalPoint equipment, and then we were going to lease bandwidth to CalPoint. And our very astute accountants came back to us and said, you can't do that. That's self-dealing. You can't, sell them this and then lease them back. You can't do. So what you have to do is you have to go find a network for them and a partner that will, you have to go buy a network and then lease it to them. You can't use your own. So I called Glenn Russo, who is a close friend and also ex-colleagues of ours. And Glenn, I know this is going to sound crazy, but we need to buy a couple fibers on your whole network. And he was like, what? And I'm like, yeah, we need to buy. And I think I know what the price should be. So this is what the price should be. And because I set a lot of that pricing at the
And this was
prior.
this is when, the bubble was in full burst
Full
mode.
bursting.
So
this was, the sky's
when
falling.
No one knew what was going to happen next.
3 years of carnage was just beginning. And Glenn's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, I'm sure. And so we bought these 2 fibers that we then took their equipment and lit it and put it into service, used the equipment to transmit over the fibers that we bought. And you guys pocketed a huge amount of money, did absolutely nothing wrong. And we had to unwind that entire transaction. So it was, and I remember at the time, like Kevin O'Hara and Glenn, we were talking on the phone and he's like, wait, what are you guys doing? And Kevin was for everything that I talked about level 3 and MFS being, it was, we're not going close to something corrupt. I mean, there was a very strong, we're not doing this if it's not right, even if we have no say in it. And we just made it super clean for level 3. So that's
Glenn
what happened.
worked for me.
And,
And Kevin sort of worked for Kevin. Officially, I worked for Buddy Miller at the time, but for practical purposes, I was really part of Kevin's team. And yes, my memory is we would have these meetings where we're going through the sales funnel and Neil would be there and Kevin and Brady and the whole gang. And we'd be like, yeah, there's this really big deal. And we try to explain the deal. Everyone's looking like, there's no way that could happen. Why would Quest buy fibers from us? What possible rationale is there? They got so much fiber in their network. And we're like, yeah, not really our business.
Not your business.
But if they're going to give us a bunch of money and take a couple of fibers, who are we to say no?
Well, it was, again, I didn't even get a dinner out of it. So thanks, Dan.
You got a glass of wine.
I got a glass of wine now. I think I got a lot more out of it than that. But I guess the funny thing was, it was when you look at it, like we couldn't do it. So we had to do it the way we did it. And I think I tried to explain that to Glenn, but I think it was, the disbelief was high. And he's like, I don't know how that can happen. But those were interesting times. Quest was again, every kind of chapter, just like you along the way, you learn something from somebody or some organization. And some of those lessons are super fulfilling and fruitful, and some are just dodging bullet kind of things. And this one was a dodging bullet kind of lesson that I'm grateful for. It was great.
Okay. So how long? So
okay.
So you were going to go on to part of Quest where now Nachio's gone. He's going to jail.
Yep. So I was there for about 10 years. I was there from 2001 to 2011. And a guy by the name of Dick Notabar.
And Nachio...
He left in 2001 or 2002, right? Early part of 2002.
And okay. So,
and then Dick Notabar came in, and then he was succeeded by Ed Miller. But Dick was the Ameritech CEO, and he was
my boss's boss.
And he was a straight shooter as straight shooters come. And he was definitely a legacy telecom guy, but he was the right person. Very respected, right person, right time. Just needed to get the morale back up in the company and bring it back to its purpose, which he did he did it really well. In doing that, he also brought a CFO with him, this guy Oren Schaefer, who was just brilliant. And Oren was an older gentleman, came out of retirement, and he's the kind of guy that you can look at a balance sheet and know exactly how to forecast it and know where the business is going, even at the point in time. Just a very, very savant financially. And he had the duty to keep Quest out of bankruptcy. While people were trying to say you should go into bankruptcy, he's like, we can't for all the employees. And
that's how you would refer to it. We need to stay out of bankruptcy.
We need to stay out of bankruptcy for the employees and for the service.
Because I hear people talk about, someone just said to me about a week ago, like, oh, we probably should have just gone through bankruptcy, but Crow wouldn't let us. But it wasn't coming from that same spot of protecting employees. But that's interesting that mindset would have been there.
It was strong, and it was such an authentic, and it was such a big change from what had been there, that you just woke up the legacy US West employees. You reignited a lot of the Quest employees who had seen all this carnage go on, and it became again this sense of purpose. And they created this brand called the Spirit of Service. I don't know if you remember this. And unfortunately, it was SOS, which we didn't point out.
You did point out before they did?
We didn't.
The marketing folks were a little
off the mark.
They were still thinking about the swaps from 5 years earlier.
Exactly. And but the Spirit of Service was kind of this guy walking in the snow, delivering the mail at any cost, or delivering the phone service at any cost. It was kind of back to, hey, we're an integral part of the community, and let's go back here. But Oren did one of his brilliant moves is he sold the Yellow Page business, and he sold it right before it tanked, and it saved us from going into bankruptcy. And I think really provided for, the next set of years that have come.
Yeah, because it was probably, they got a lot of cash for that.
They got a lot of cash. That was in the billions. And I want to say it was close to the 6 kind of range, but I don't remember exactly. Yeah. And Oren and Dick just brought, again, a level of discipline and a level of, hey, we're doing the right thing here. We're not just chasing things.
Yeah, we're business leaders.
We're business leaders.
Telling stories or
creating
illusions.
Did you watch Succession? Did you watch the show?
Yes.
So my favorite line is when he says, "You're just not serious people." He says that to his kids, and that Nacho just wasn't a serious person. Dick and Oren were serious people. I mean, they were serious people with serious business, and they knew how to run things, and they did a great job. And they brought in some other great talent as well. A guy by the name of Tom Richards, who was an MIT grad, very militant discipline. One of the greatest guys. He went on to become the CEO of CDW, and he recently died. But such the kind of people he brought in were the kind of people.
Where's Dick Notabar nowadays?
He's still in Chicago, and I don't know him very well. I keep up with a lot of Teresa Taylor, who well, and she keeps up with Dick quite a bit.
I would like to just talk to him for 5 minutes and say,
Teresa can give you a connection to him right away, and I know he would love it. He would give you some real inside scoop.
Yeah, because he literally was, when I was last year or so at Ameritech, if my memory's correct, he was emerging as the CEO, and again, in those Bell Systems, there was huge bureaucratic separation between where I was and where the CEO of the company. It's not like today where the CEO tries to become accessible to the employees. There, it was barriers between that. So he was kind of someone you looked at from a distance and wondered who this person even was. But then the story of Quest made it kind of validate that he was, very, very highly respected within the Bell world.
Without question. And again, what he did was he saved a company, and he saved it to live another day. He didn't save it for generations. I don't think that was possible, but he saved it to live another day. And frankly,
probably if he was 5 years younger, it was possible. But
possible, right. But he also brought this guy, Barry Miller, who was a great HR guy. It's a really nice set of talent and I think Barry was at Ameritech as well.
That name's not familiar.
But so then Quest was, at the time we were 75,000 people. By the time I left, we were 30,000 people. And so the company went through a lot of layoffs. But
were you there when Notabar took a run, kind of his last?
Yeah, at MCI.
Yeah, he took a run. MCI was WorldCom. So the thing of WorldCom, who bought MCI, was once when combined, it was worth well over $100 million. So they changed their brand from the tainted WorldCom back to the MCI. So now that company has to be sold. And Notabart took a
strong run at that, and we were that was a strong run, and I think that we really had the better bid. But the shareholders so desperately did not want Quest to buy MCI, and probably ended up the way it should have. But
there's obvious answers to why, but at the time, what did it feel like? Like, why did it feel like they were resisting? Was it something more than, hey, we're WorldCom, we're tainted, we don't want to go to Joe Naccio's company?
I think it was exactly that. I don't think it was anything more substantive than that. I wasn't close enough to know whether there's something triggering, but the deal itself was solid.
Yeah.
And the leadership team that was trying to do this was solid, but it was like Quest was a cowboy company at this time. We'd reputationally become that.
Yeah. Because they topped the bid by a lot. And then I think they topped it the second time. Before he finally said, I can't go any higher.
I can't go any higher. And MCI so desperately wanted integrity back through Verizon kind of. And I think that's what eventually triggered it. If there's more to it, I don't know what it is. But Quest went on to acquire, different data center businesses, different network businesses. We had this thing that we let go of called an application service provider.
Wasn't that Denzel Samuels went over there?
It was. And it was an application service providers were just the cloud, just 15 years too early,
We used to make up
right?
names for stuff to make it sound more glorious.
And now it's so funny now that the cloud is there. I'm like, that's the same thing we did 20 years ago.
I don't know why the word telecom wasn't glorious all by itself.
I mean, come on. That's so sexy. We could spell it with a K, maybe. Make it German. But the Quest was a really interesting ride. And again, for me, it was just a good way to get some management chops and to really know how to lead sizable teams and get more discipline and process and depend on the process versus depending on stepping in and fixing things or manipulating things with the smaller companies. And I think one of the things we talk about as innovators and people trying to start businesses is that you can't underestimate how hard it is to execute a good idea. And for the first step, how hard it is to execute one time and then execute it scalably where the founder is not touching every part of the business, but they have to scale themselves in the business. It's sometimes it's a step too far for people. And I think I really wanted to learn what it took when you only had a very small touch to every touch that happened, down at the customer level. And that was really fun. It was, and we did some things with pricing and that you could only do with big data sets. You could only do with, a big company. So that was a good time. But when Quest was acquired by CenturyLink, that was it. I've been to Jackson. I wasn't going to Monroe.
So what did you do after that?
So for a year, I went to work for a satellite provider called Viasat. I was a COO for their broadband division. And I just quickly found satellite was not fun. It was satellite broadband
before your times. You need to get in those
small, low Earth orbiting. I don't even get that. I don't get that at all. Yeah. I don't understand the economics. And
I used to laugh at. I'd go visit SpaceX, and they'd be like, "Yeah, we're going to put a bunch of these really small satellites in the sky, and we're going to offer internet service." I'm like, "Are you kidding me?
What problem are you chasing? Like, are you?"
And then it worked.
Well, it works, but who uses? I mean, I don't know.
Oh, a lot of people use it.
But they're only in niches. Like ships, airplanes, Africa. Oh, then you got to educate me on this.
They use it as backup here in U.S. where they have 2 fiber cables in the home. We've thought about getting it here for augmenting the internet service just in case.
In the rarefied atmosphere that we're sitting in, I can understand why that may be the case.
That is probably worth as much as the rest of space. Like when they separate that, and I assume they will. Well, I think the valuation of that business is going to be as big as the rest of their business.
Well, low Earth orbiting satellites have a very different economic. Although they're expensive, they have to be launched every 5 years. I mean, there's a ton of them around.
Ton of them, but they're each, I think, only this big.
Tiny.
And they don't cost nothing. So you go.
But launching it is not cheap.
Yeah, but you put shitloads in one big launch vehicle, and who cares if they?
But I'm just saying, Viasat is geosynchronous. They're 18,000 miles above. There's $300 million to launch a satellite, and it's up there for 20 years, and it's got a very finite capacity. The economics just don't work,
and it's got
the
latency.
The
latency is a big deal.
It's high, so it wasn't something that was native to me. It didn't feel right, and that's when I started talking to another friend of mine, or an old friend of mine, Dan Caruso.
Yes.
And Zayo was becoming clearly a company that was rolling up the orphan telcos that were just kind of at the wrong time, that we time shifted it and rolling up a ton of value in the assets, but turning that into a real operation. And you just acquired AboveNet when I joined, and you wanted somebody to go integrate the European network. So I got to do that for us for about a year and a half, which was also blasted, going back and forth to London a lot. And what I remember talking to you about Zayo, the thesis, what it looked like from an investment standpoint, meaning I remember saying, do you really want to go public? And you're like, well, that's going to play its own course, and we're going to do what the investors want. But I remember thinking, there's what you're trying to say between the lines, and I'm not trying to speak for you, is that recognizing that being public and the kind of work you're trying to do is very different than doing it in the private markets.
Yeah. Investors were like ganged up against me in a good way, not a bad way, but ganged up against me before AboveNet and insisted that we go public because they wanted an exit.
Right.
They were in the money. Things were going really well. They would have made 5 times, maybe 6 times their money. They're like, it's time to sell. We want to take our chips off the table. And I'm like, we're just getting started. I mean, we can't go public now. So I literally got into like, I think it's safe to say, I don't know how each of them will remember it, but I pretty much had to give them an ultimatum and say, if you guys want to take this public now, you need a CEO to do that. And, if you think I'm valuable as the CEO to take it public, my vote's no.
Right.
And I don't know how close it came, because I do remember generally where we had that quote unquote conversation. And I remember they were talking for like 45 minutes. And that's when I went in the room. I'm like, knocked on the door, went in the room. I'm like, I know you guys are still talking about this, but I want to make sure I was crystal clear when I left the room last time. If I come back in the room and you tell me you guys got together and decided
we're filing
you're taking
S1,
the company public, you don't have a CEO or something to that effect. I left the room again, and I'm like, did I overplay my hand? Because maybe they don't want me to be CEO. Maybe like, good, you just gave us the invitation to say, Dan, we want to go public, and you're not the public company CEO, because I was not your prototypical public company CEO. But they came back and they said, okay, here's the deal. We'll give you an opportunity, but you got to go raise more money, and we're not going to make it easy because we don't want to get caught in a trap ourselves,
right?
Understandably. So they said, the new money has to come in. We're not going to give control of the company. We're not going to reset a long timeline for the new guys to come in and, be an investor for 5-7 years. So you got to come up with a structure that kind of balances that. And that led to kind of the pursuit of GTCR, which as soon as that got done, that led to the pursuit of AboveNet. And, and without AboveNet, I would have just been, and Zayo would have been kind of an interesting asterisk on what happened in the industry. But combined with AboveNet, all of a sudden we launched ourselves to be
a real
kind
platform.
of a real player. Yeah.
And that almost doubled the size of the company.
More than double. More than double.
And it also brought you outside of the US as well, with real fiber networks and real operation platform. And I remember, I don't know if you remember this, we were having a drink like right after you had signed GTCR, and you were so happy. Like, we just raised this capital, and it's going to take us to this exponential step. And then you said, we just got to keep growing because we don't want to be an acquisition target. We want to be the player. And that was what was exciting to me.
Yeah. Cause I didn't want to, this may be right or wrong. This isn't a question of like, what's the right answer, but I really felt compelled, both from a personal level and maybe from a team level, that we could build something of substance, of sustainability, of where we're creating value in all the right ways. And I just felt this necessity, this drive. Like, I don't want to be, remembered as someone who sold at the right time, got a huge, markup on a valuation, but never really proved that the business was, sustainable in its own right, that it could deliver positive cash flow and deliver growth in a way where the economics of the business were driving the value. And I don't know why that's the case. I mean, why not just take your money and run? But it felt so necessary given everything we've been through in the 2 decades prior to that.
Well, I think it'll sound trite when you say it's not about the money, but sometimes it just isn't. Like sometimes it's you have enough.
I mean, it was always about the money.
Like, but I'm just saying,
don't get me wrong.
But again, I was talking to someone yesterday about this. Like, but if it's just about the money and you're not doing something,
it wasn't just about the money.
That's right.
That's the difference.
And so having a real sense of purpose and building something that's indelible is way more valuable, even though you wouldn't do it for free, right?
Yeah.
So I think that joining Zayo for me was one, coming back home again. So kind of thematically there.
Because there are a lot of familiar faces by the time you got
100
of them.
I mean, Glenn Russo was there, and Matt Erickson was. I mean, every people that we had worked with for decades, and the thing that I think I told you this before. What you did at Zayo, which I thought was ingenious, kind of coming out of the paradox of scale speech that you gave at Metro Connect, which I thought was a cool insight. What you did is you kept organizing the company to be highly, highly accountable. And based upon the experience of all these functional organizations at big companies, all kind of thinking they're doing a great job, but when it comes together, they're not delivering the equity value that they would otherwise be delivering if they had direct accountability from end to end. And when I would tell people, hey, no, we each have our own engineering function. We each have people are like, well, that's so wasteful. Why would you have a business unit?
It's so inefficient.
It's so inefficient. I'm like, well, the accountability so offsets the inefficiency and it ties together the simple step it takes to create value. You can't hide from it. Why wouldn't everyone do this? And I think there's so much like discomfort in it. People are uncomfortable with it, and that's why they don't do it, not because it doesn't make sense.
Yeah, when we sold Zayo, I'm going to be a little careful how I say this because I'm not looking to offend anyone. But when we sold Zayo, we were including Allstream at 50%, EBITDA margins, but excluding Allstream, it would have been in the 56, 57% EBITDA margin, which is extraordinarily high for the industry. Well, the new investors came in, and one of their thesis was they're going to bring efficiencies to our business. I'm like, well, that's interesting. You're going to bring efficiencies. Like, what do you think efficiency means?
Because we haven't integrated anything.
Yeah.
We hadn't, we hadn't put in big systems.
Whole nother story.
Yeah.
But when I said, what do you mean by efficiency? It's like, well, we're going to have one engineering department instead of 4. We're going to have one operations group instead of this. We're going to have this instead of that. I'm like, well, let me tell you how I define efficiency. I define efficiency. It's not perfect, but the EBITDA margin is a pretty big sign of efficiency because, if you have a high EBITDA margin, that doesn't speak to how you're spending capital, but it certainly speaks to how much revenue you get to keep. I'm like, so if we're at, outside of Allstream, if we're at 57%, is your plan to get to 70? 58, 60? Because all of our peers are at like 30%, maybe 35.
Yeah.
So you're going to take what our peer group does at 30, 35. You're going to declare that we're inefficient and you're going to bring that margin higher. They didn't want to have that conversation. Their margin today, by the way, is 43%.
I was going to say it's at least 10 basis points. And and I think our unlevered free cash, unlevered was in the 20s. It wasn't even that.
Yeah.
And that's also speaks to a really efficient use of capital. The way
levered was always positive. I wanted to be more positive. I wanted the growth rate to be higher, but the levered cash flow was always positive, not by a lot. The unlevered was always very positive. And that mattered. It's like you could, the equation for whether your company is becoming more valuable or not involves whether you're generating cash or not generating cash, and involves at what pace you're growing. And
what pace
those are all related. And if you don't think about it in that context, then you're just making emotional arguments about what. Well,
then you're back to WorldCom, and then you're back to Quest in the just grow at all cost versus create value.
Or even level 3 and MFS, they had no way of really understanding kind of what the financials were telling them.
Well, you'd be proud to know that in my own fund now, I have a lot of investors. It's a small fund, but every quarter I do a 3-quarter back, 3-quarter forward.
Do you?
I do. And I show where the mark is on the equity based on a cap rate because we're in real estate. And
tell us more about, let's back up a little bit and lead to that. Tell us about this real estate fund and what you're doing, how you got involved with it. And maybe even before you fully hit there, you worked for the governor. Yeah.
So when I left Zayo in early 2016, my plan truly was to stare at a wall. I was tired. And I felt like, I don't really want to I'm good. And I thought maybe I'll serve on a couple
When you
boards.
say stare at the wall, do you mean at your place in Vail, that place up in the Vail Mountain?
Or Newport Beach.
Or Newport.
But some of those things that you helped me along with. But the answer is I was going to enjoy life. But I found very quickly that I started getting involved in different stuff, and the Blackstone Entrepreneur Network and different small companies that I thought were really interesting in helping them scale. And I was at a Zayo 10-year anniversary party, and one of the governor's lieutenants came up to me and said, "Hey, Steph, Gov wants to talk to you." Gov, that's what they call him. This is Governor Hickenlooper.
Yeah,
it's a small
Gov.
state. Everyone knows each other. And he said, "You're not doing anything, so why don't you come work for him?" And I was like, "I don't want to work again. I'm not going to work for the government." I mean, come on. But then I thought, you know what? Why not? I've never worked in civil, like I'd never worked as a civic employee. I didn't even know how the government worked in Colorado. I was so naive. I learned everything I knew on Schoolhouse Rock. And I'm like, how hard could this be? And I did a little bit of diligence, but I went to talk to his chief of staff and they offered me the job. And like the second day we went to Davos and I got to meet all these great people. It was amazing.
How is Davos?
Oh, it was very cool.
Yeah.
It was very cool. I'll have to tell you the time I unplugged the security equipment in one of the hotels by mistake. But got to meet Bill Gates and Friedman, and I sitting next to Chuck Robbins and the CEO of IBM. I mean, it was unbelievable. And Trump had just been elected, so it was charged. It was very charged. It was a really cool time.
I don't think that was popular in Davos.
It was not popular at Davos. No, this was not a Trump rally at all. So for 2 years, I worked for Hickenlooper, and I got to really understand how at least small government, small G worked here in Colorado. We're a home rule state. It's very much state government has very little control over municipality rule because we're a very kind of Western home rule state. We have a part-time legislature, which a lot of people don't know. And you can imagine what that leads to. I didn't know they
were part-time.
Yeah, it's only half the year they're in session. We have, there are appointed, there's a number of appointed positions that are cabinet. There are some elected cabinet positions. I was an appointee, so I wasn't worried about being fired or being elected. And I ran an agency that was all about growth in the economy. So it was a blast. So we launched the Rural Fund out of the Venture Capital Authority. We launched Startup Colorado 2.0 to try to get more entrepreneurship going around the state. It was just,
and we still, by the way, Crusoe Foundation still supports Startup Colorado at CU.
At CU, which
we have every year since you guys started.
It's amazing. And it's amazing what you see out of these little communities because talent can be everywhere. And there's a propensity for certain types of talent in different places, but you can really build real wealth in some of these places. And it just starts to build community. Okay.
Which is a big deal.
It's a big deal because our state we're 6 million people, but we're highly concentrated in an area, and we need to start to disperse in order for the state to remain the place that people kind of bought into. So Grand Junction, which is on the western slope, is a big area of emphasis, and it's going to be kind of the next economic center, if it isn't already, the kind of offsetting the Front Range. In any event, and by the way, I was talking to President Marshall, who's the president of CMU, of Colorado Mesa University. They have a really tight engineering relationship with CU Boulder, and they came over to learn all about quantum.
Oh, awesome.
And they came over to figure out how they could partner and do more quantum supplying out of CMU, which I thought was super cool. Yeah.
Yes.
So during my tenure there, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act was enacted in December of 2017. And in there was a provision that called opportunity zones. And opportunity zones were designated by census tract across the country by governors, where if you had a capital gain, and after you realized that if within 180 days, within 6 months, you realized a capital gain, you invested it through a mechanism into one of these census tracts, you got really strong tax benefits, like no tax on appreciation and a discount and a deferral on the actual capital gains tax itself. And so there was a whole gold rush of people trying to find ways to invest. And I had designated all the zones in Colorado through Hickenlooper. And so we decided when I left his administration to start a fund, and we wanted to bring housing infrastructure to places where I knew there was nascent value, resort communities, places in Grand Junction, Estes Park, Durango, that just had no supply and no institutionals were coming in. So that's what I've been doing for the last 6 years. Mm-hmm. And we've built about 1 million square feet, about 1,000 units of infrastructure. I was greatly helped, and frankly, would not have done what we were able to do without the investment and support of the Zoma lab, which is Ben Walton's.
Oh, I didn't realize that.
Yeah, they own 10% of our GP and he has been a catalyst for us.
He being Ben?
Yes, has been a catalyst for us. And he hasn't been he's not trying to artificially subsidize it at all. He's doing the right thing for us.
Right thing for the right reason.
Right thing for the right reason, but at the right price as well, meaning he's being very, very fair, but he's not trying to look at this as a nonprofit. He's just trying to catalyze.
No, it can't
sustain itself. And so he's doing the right things and catalyzing a group now that has a platform across Colorado. We have apartments in 9 markets now in Colorado outside of the Front Range.
And they're all opportunity zones?
All opportunity zones. And some of them have big partnerships with government. Some of them are just normal apartment buildings.
So we might be coming off of a real estate investment that will have a gain sometime next year or so. Should we be like trying to plan to redeploy that in an opportunity zone?
So the opportunity zone legislation expires at the end of 26. So you're able to continue to invest until then, but the tax benefit of the deferral and the discount has gone away. So the deferral only is deferred until you still pay tax on the capital gain, but any appreciation on the investment, if you hold it for 10 years, is tax-free. So if you have something that's going to, over 10 years, is going to earn, let's call it 12, 13, 14%, it probably juices up by 300 or 400 basis points.
Gotcha.
And you can it cash flows tax-free as well. So it's a really nice, we can talk about that later. And you should, particularly there's some.
I'm trying to get my
nice
team
sites
here to like say, hey, we got to go figure this out.
Yeah, we'll do. I got you. We've deployed all of our capital. We have a $100 million fund, but it's perfect because it's a great size and we get to do things in our community. And that's been a blast. But the thing that I think.
And the name of the fund is?
4 Points Funding.
4 points.
Yeah, 4 points. And my partners are in Steamboat. We have employees in Basalt, Silverthorne, Denver, all over the state. Yeah.
Very cool.
It's really fun. And it's kind of like telecom in that you make a big capital bet and then you create an annuity stream.
Real estate.
So, yeah.
A lot of what we did in telecom was real estate.
It's property rights.
I was talking to someone the other day. We're in an investment together and it involves we don't do much in real estate, but we have 2 real estates, not the one I was referring to, a different one. And they're like, well, this is like a real estate development. None of us have that expertise. And I'm like, dude. I'm like,
right of way, attached rights,
data centers. Everything is real estate, property, build out, construction.
Absolutely. It's so funny when I talk to data centers now and they're like, we just did this ABS financing and we did this. I'm like, oh, just say you did a mortgage. Why do you have to?
Speaking of data center financing and mortgages, so AI is going like crazy.
Yeah.
And one of the big implications of AI is big tech companies need gigantic data centers, gigantic, energy to feed those data centers.
Yep.
You're on the board of Vantage with our good friend Surreal.
Yep.
Tell us about the whole data center world that's going on right now. I mean, it's dramatically different now than even 2 or 3 years ago.
And full disclosure, I was repping the Public Service Pension Fund of Canada. They exited and I exited with them. So
gotcha.
I left his board in March, but close enough that and a lot of our mutual friends, Balin and Valeria, are also still on the board there. It's amazing the kind of capital that's being deployed by the large hyperscalers, and hyperscalers meaning the Microsofts, AWS, Oracle, Google, and the capital they're deploying is it's like a chase to making sure that they're keeping up with everything that's coming down the pike for them. So the data centers customers are driving all this capital deployment. I don't think you can even see the end of the horizon of that demand. The thing that always makes me nervous about it, and it's irrational, is that are all the people driving the demand to Microsoft, are they solvent? Are they, long-term players? Because there's so much speculation in AI right now. So
we're worried about Microsoft and Google being long-term players?
We're worried about their customers, the thing that's driving their demand, leaving them holding the bag. That said, that's a nervousness because of what we've all gone through and the frothiness that we've seen that doesn't look frothy at the time. But so no, I'm not worried about Microsoft or Google's balance sheet.
Shoo.
No, and I'm not even worried about Oracle's. But I am I am kind
Oracle's maybe a little bit.
He can sell some boats or something. He just won't buy. Never mind. So I guess the point is, when there's this much frothiness, people tend to do a little bit of irrational things. Again, the core infrastructure and data center seems like it has many chapters ahead of it, but the biggest problem they have is access to capital and power.
Yep.
It's not demand.
So I want to, I'm not an investor in Lumen. I am an investor in Zayo because I didn't have to, but I did roll over a bunch of my equity position. I do have an announcement for Lumen and for Zayo.
Let's hear it.
When they need that dark fiber to connect those data centers, whatever price you're thinking about charging them, triple it. Quadruple it. They can afford to pay it, and there's no way they could get the fiber from anywhere else. So
absolutely
do it. Just do it.
It's so funny. You saw the jump in price just recently at Lumen because of
what was your take on that? Do you know what happened there?
I think so I listened to an interview that she did, and I think she did a big deal where they paid up front and it just changed their cash position.
Big deal for what?
It was for fiber. And
so what was interesting is, one is you and I know full well they got a lot of extra conduits.
Right.
And then I don't know if you noticed the other announcement that was done pretty much to the same day, but seemingly, if you read it, not clearly related. That announcement was a big deal with Corning. Our good friend Wendell Weeks.
Yeah.
About getting the capacity on the new generation of fiber. So the notion that maybe what they were selling was not as simple as, hey, we just sold dark fiber, but maybe they sold conduit, and maybe they sold new fiber in conduit that may be shared by more than one of them. But the question of, is this new fiber, just a small incremental improvement that doesn't really make a difference? Or is this Jim Crow's vision from years ago about having excess conduits is going to
chase
make new generations of fiber, that's going to make old fiber obsolete? That was supposed to happen every 3 or 4 years. Maybe he meant 3 or 4 decades. But is this a sign of that? And is the new fiber any different than the old fiber in a economically material way?
And none of those details, I think, are clear. They're not clear to me.
No, they're very opaque.
But the particular
$5 billion was sold, and $7 billion more.
And the cash position changed dramatically, which
it did.
Yeah, that's why I think that stock jumped. From what I read.
I didn't hear the talk. I didn't look at the balance sheet, and I certainly didn't hear the talk of that.
That's what I believe occurred, but it went from like $1 to $5. It was a kind of a 500%.
Almost $8 for a second there.
It was
it's down to mid sixes.
I mean, it's still kind of a curve, but it's going the right way now, which is
going
great.
From 50 cents to like $8 is only a curve if it goes back down to 50 cents.
Exactly right. Again, it is funny because you think about all the infrastructure that Zayo put in the ground, that Level 3 put in the ground, that all that we did building up, that is still there, that is ripe for harvesting, and to your point, is becoming even more valuable. Like I think that there's just, people forget that. And I was talking to this small network in Florida, and they have middle mile and last mile. They have last mile, but no middle mile fiber. And I'm like, why wouldn't you just go? You have a pretty big network. Why don't you just go buy some fiber? And they don't. I don't think people think that way.
I mean, there's still like this gigantic disconnect. Like Zayo is maybe, I don't know, valued at $14 billion. We sold it at $14 billion. Maybe it's worth, I don't know, something like that today. Hopefully a lot more, but somewhere in that vicinity is where you'd get to based on kind of today's market value. So, $14 billion is a drop in the hat.
For the replacement cost, right?
For replacement cost and for what big data center companies are worth, what Google's worth. So if this is really the critical infrastructure, why wouldn't like someone who's $14 billion means nothing? Like, does $14 billion even show up as a purchase for Google? Does it even show up for Microsoft? Why buy fibers in a conduit? Why not say, you know what, how about I give you $20 billion and I take over your entire network, and we're going to have all this infrastructure that we could put to work, kind of like the AWS cloud.
Right.
I mean, why is 14 or 15 or $16 billion in a ballpark? And Lumen, is, I don't know what their debt and equity is worth. Maybe it's,
well, they were right over $1 billion at trading at 50 cents. So now what are they, $5 or $6 billion? So it's
on the equity side, but the debt's maybe $25 billion. And that's been discounted heavily, maybe not so much after this announcement, but let's say it's 25 billion total, the debt and equity, or 30 billion, whatever number is. I mean, why is that not 100 billion?
Right.
And the economics of the business don't support the higher numbers. But there's a question there, why not? I mean, the space is so consolidated, bandwidth's so important. What's preventing each of them from saying, we're increasing prices by 10% a year,
Right.
every year from this point forward? Well, if they did that, they'd be worth double the amount. But there'd have to be some level of, I could say this because I don't have any decision making, some level of reading the tea leaves to each other, that why are we being so stupid giving our valuable assets away now that the industry is consolidated for kind of bargain purchase prices? Let's all just like observe a little bit of each other's behavior, and we don't want to violate any antitrust laws, but these companies are worth nothing relative to the importance of the assets and the role it plays in today's world.
To your point, it's fair. I mean, it's a fair price, and it has, if you can really value it. It's not about cost. It's not about manipulation of price. It's about being fair and giving somebody trading value in the right way. I think that like a Google, a Microsoft, and others, the only thing I can imagine that would inhibit them from buying someone is not wanting the operational, drag on it. So don't take it, and shut it down.
Put it on a hard harvest mode. And,
exactly.
They definitely,
it'll find its home.
And they should be able, I mean, they run the cloud environment, which used to be our, what was the word you used? Yeah. Our ASPs are now the AWS cloud.
Right. Right.
We just didn't quite make it worth countless billions like they have.
We didn't understand. That's right. I think again, what becomes really clear in hindsight is always hard at the time. And you created a new category called infrastructure, which was not a term in telecom. And we were comped against, legacy telecom companies for a long time before we and others broke out based on the kind of path you drove. But also, I think soon a service provider is going to look very different. If I think about the media industry right now, I mean, think about what's a cable company really going to be going forward? Is it going to be a network, or is it going to be a content provider, or is it going to be both? And that when I think about how that's going to shape up, it's very similar. A network service provider, should we just be the Intel inside and let Microsoft and AWS run everything else?
Yeah, I always had, in the cable world, it was always thought and said and repeated that content is king. They made their money off of content. But I always had a different point of view. They made their money because they controlled the pipe into the homes. Right. And once you control the pipe to the homes, you could create HBO.
That's right.
And funnel out the pipe. You could create pay-per-view. But it was the pipe in the home that was really their, as in Buffett language, that was their franchise. Right. That was their monopoly. That's where they had something that no one else could replicate. And then they could create value on top of that by, extracting more value out of the content. But if they were just content plays and they didn't have like the dominant pipe into the homes, would Comcast be the company it is today? Would John Malone be the legend he is today? I don't think so.
Yeah, captive audiences help.
Yeah,
a lot.
Yeah.
And again, through the disruption they're going through, I think it's going to be completely re-engineered. Just like I think network service providers are going to be completely re-engineered, and there's a place at every layer for people to play, but capture the right value for it.
Yeah, which can be elusive at times, as we've learned.
Yes.
I still wonder why when I sold Zayo, it wasn't 20 times EBITDA and we're 20 billion. But,
I think we're
hopefully you guys will get us there.
Yeah.
What else? So tell us about Endeavor, Colorado.
So, it's so cool. Endeavor has been this really neat organization to join. I met Linda while at Zayo when she was on the Zayo board. Is she still part of the Zayo board?
No, she when we sold it, there was no board member that
didn't come with the.
No.
And so, really interesting concept around.
And she's going to do a podcast, by the way.
Oh, cool! She's
a rock star.
She's a rock star, and she's such a just a force of nature. In that, it takes so much force to build up an ecosystem.
If she doesn't get a Nobel Prize for what she's done, I mean,
and just building wealth and community
across the globe, areas that had no business having unicorn. That's all over the world now, and she and the Endeavor global team played a huge role in it.
I think that what's so interesting is not that it was another group coming in to try to build ecosystem and support entrepreneurs, but to do it sustainably, which is always the hard part. And so having a group that can start to feed off of itself and create the flywheel that then becomes the snowball that becomes the real center of gravity is really cool. And some of the entrepreneurs that I've met.
Are you getting as nervous as I'm getting when I see them playing with these cameras?
I know. What are we doing? Do I have like?
Yeah. Well, the battery's out. How are the other cameras? Anyways, Endeavor.
Endeavor is, again, I think it's the thing that makes it so fascinating to me is that you get involved with nonprofits that try to do the right thing. It's very rare that you get involved with a nonprofit that also has a recycling effect that really does regenerate both itself and the community. And if you look at the mapping that she's done in the community she's impacted, it's clear. I feel like we're so primed in Colorado to be another success story. It's not going to happen overnight, and we're already really successful, but to become more recognizable on the map, it's going to take some time, but we're well on our way there.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Endeavor's all about the scale up success stories, which spawns the new startups, spawns, inspires people to go forward. How do you use those Endeavor companies as a platform for the greater good of the community?
You mentioned something too. Like one of the things you wanted was other Zayo executives to go and do become an aspen tree, grow over.
Oh, yes.
They do other things. And yesterday we were on the call with Endeavor, and one of the founders of GNIP was on the call with his next, phase. That's so cool. That's exactly what you want. You want repeat actors that are continuing to spawn more management teams that are going to continue to do more. So
I haven't done this yet, but I'm going to put on. We're going to release book Bandwidth, toward the end of this year, and I'm going to do a tree not in the book itself, but on the website that's associated with that. That's a combination tree between MFS, Level 3, and Zayo, and all of the people who went off and did crazy
coolest
things.
Like Don Gipps and when we went public, do you remember we all did pictures in the different groups, and it was amazing the Venn diagram of everyone that overlapped, but also where they've gone now, like what Matt's building right now, what Chris Morley has gone and done, just recently.
There's a guy, I don't know if you came across Noah Drake, he would have been really early in his stage there.
Yep.
He just got named CEO of a Columbia Capital Bank company, amazing. Which is awesome. And there's all kinds of them, and I can't wait to
look at.
Whether they're Zayo related, MFS, Surreal. Look at Surreal. Surreal's like
it's doing amazing, and he's doing it the right way. He's caught a wave, and he's doing it absolutely the right way. And he's got a band around him that looks a lot like Level 3 and Zayo.
A lot of familiar names there,
familiar faces. So it's been a blast, and it does take a little bit of catalyst. I think one thing I would say is that I wish I had taken more risk earlier, although I wasn't ready to. And so for all the women out there that have, want to do this, know there's a lot of support behind you, and you should take more risk if you feel like you've got a good idea. And secondly, surround yourself with great people, both at your side, above you, below you, around you, and you can't go wrong. It's been the key.
Yeah. And I, when I reflect back on my career, I was a bit of a, renegade without a cause at times, trying to push things forward and not, maybe I had good IQ, but I didn't have great EQ. So I had to develop kind of the EQ components slowly over time and, through a lot of lessons hard way. But in the most memorable parts of my journey, it's about the team that I was with at that point in time and what we did together and the, the things that we had to fight through and the walls we had to, crash through, and the looking back and saying, who were we to do that? And I look at my personal story, but I look at the personal story of each person around me, and they, like you, all had their own crazy personal stories.
Crazy.
And very few of them were, I was born into like a wealthy East Coast family, went to Harvard or whatever. They're mostly.
We went to the Harvard of Illinois.
We went to Harvard of Illinois. Most of them were like us. They were like, people who stumbled into the right place at the right time, but also worked hard, worked smartly, took risks, and somehow as a team, with good inspirations above us, somehow got our way through like a really exciting, journey. No, it's great. And again, cheers to that. Cheers to that. That's a good way to end it. Excellent. Cheers to that. Thank you. And thanks for being such a good friend. Same. Thank you. Right. Okay.
Thank you for listening to this episode with the Bear Roars. If you enjoyed the episode, please like and subscribe on your listening platform. This podcast was produced by Loud Bear Productions and edited by Courtney Caruso with support from Kendall Weinberg, Emily Reed, and Gibson Siegert.